Hello, everybody. Welcome into MLS Digest. We're here to preview Week 30 MLS action coming up on August 23rd and 24th. We got a full slate, and we're still in the midst of Leagues Cup, and all four MLS teams advanced to the semifinals, meaning all the Liga MX sides dropped out, with Tigres, Toluca, Puebla, and Pachuca all losing in the opening round of the knockout stage. So that means we're going to have Miami hosting Orlando and then the Galaxy hosting the Sounders. Both of those matchups have been actually recent matchups in MLS play too. And so we're seeing a lot of opportunities for revenge and all that. But obviously, of course, we're winding down with the final 10 or so games now of the MLS season, and things are getting pretty serious here with a lot of standings up for grabs. So a lot of new signings, if you haven't been aware of course, with Müller, of course, joining the Whitecaps, Son joining LAFC, and a bunch of other moves made around the league, as the deadline day for this summer transfer window was actually yesterday or last night, I believe, at the time of this recording. And so there were a lot of shifts of players between clubs in MLS, and also, of course, a bunch of signings that were announced maybe a while ago but are now finally being processed and finalized. So we might see some other players finally start featuring for their teams once they get visas and all that pretty shortly here. I'll get you everything you need to know on all 15 matchups this weekend, with lineup expectations, who's in and who's out, whether that be injuries or suspensions, and of course some predictions on the games and some best bets that I'll be taking. If you're interested in that, before we get into everything, please make sure to like this video below and subscribe to the channel. We're about to hit 500 subs. We're coming up on that, so I really appreciate your support. To start the slate off, we have Cincinnati hosting NYC. It's first in the East against a play-in team at the moment. And of course, points are mattering. I mean, there's so many teams at the moment between both conferences vying for Supporter Shield on top of just winning their own conference. And then, of course, for the play-in spots, everything's very, very tight. So Cincinnati and NYC both coming off wins in their previous matches. And, of course, neither made it to Leagues Cup, so no extra the knockouts, so no extra games to deal with recently. Cincinnati, Evander got his revenge against Portland. They went out to a very commanding 3-0 lead on the road early, but then was really, really shaky. They almost completely choked that, but ended up coming out with the win. NYC, meanwhile, came back from an early goal down and a very long weather delay at home to turn it around and beat Nashville. And so an impressive comeback there, where they've been primarily picking up most of their points. And in this one, I see kind of a flip-floppy game as far as what the result might be. Cincinnati, last time out at home, dominated the ball, really just somehow couldn't find the back of the net despite good phases of play in possession against Charlotte, and then got a late goal scored against them after picking up a red card. And for Cincinnati as well right now, they have Orejano and Robinson out on that back line. They picked up Marchuk, who's going to be acting as a wingback for them from RSL. And for NYC, just recently, it just seems like they've been kind of pouring in the goals since Leagues Cup as well, putting on some pretty good performances with Fernandez now in the fold. And, of course, Alonso Martinez has been honestly very, very consistent for this team despite all the ups and downs. And even though the splits might not, point towards this first best bet that I'm taking, I do like it in this scenario, partially also because of Cincinnati's, players missing on the back line, and the fact that Denkey is finally back. He subbed on for like 1 minute in that Charlotte game, and then immediately started that Timbers game, and of course was involved. And so he's kind of one of those workhorses in the league, doesn't really miss many games unless it's a serious injury, and he's recovered. So in this one, I'm going to take both to score and over 2.5 at even odds. I think it's a solid play here. I don't think Cincinnati can be trusted to keep clean sheets, but at home, of course, they do have pretty good splits. By the numbers, they aren't creating a whole lot, but now with Denkey back in the fold, and of course Evander there, there's always going to be opportunities. And NYC as well, I think they've played teams very, very tightly, regardless of the results. And I think they can definitely, do their part as far as scoring against this weaker Cincinnati back line. And on normal rest, both these teams coming in with full confidence, I think the value is here, and I'm going to take that. I think Cincinnati probably edges this one out 2-1. Moving on to another Ohio team at home, it's the Crew hosting New England. And both these teams dropping points last time out. The Crew giving up a potential 3 points on the road in Toronto. Conceded a late equalizer, thought they scored the winner, but Gazdag was offside. And for him with the Crew, since moving from the Union, it's been honestly shocking as far as the production. It seems like that's just the epitome of what it's been, that offside goal. It's just he's not getting on the score sheet somehow, despite, this team still kind of ebbing and flowing in the way that Nancy would like. But the goals haven't been on that same production since, of course, Cucho left. That's been the theme all season. And now they got Abou Ali. He's all ready to go. It seems like he's been training. So will we see his first start? I would like to think so, but, it might take a game or two regardless of his talent. And New England can be stingy defensively, despite the fact that they've been in terrible form recently. Just lost to LAFC at home, especially at home is where they've been really disappointing. And, despite that really long stretch of an unbeaten streak since then, they've just shown, honestly, who they are, despite some talented pieces in that team. They're just not piecing together the results. And I will say, though, when healthy, as they are right now, on the road, we've seen them put up stingy defensive performances. The Crew are probably going to have a lot of the ball, a lot of, long passing sequences, breaking this New England side down. Will New England be able to hold up? I don't know fully. And added the fact, the wild card, that Abou Ali's playing his first start. I just want to see, what it looks like, if it's going to be more efficient or not. Can he hit the ground running? I think the Crew win here. Probably, a lower scoring scoreline. I don't know if New England can really threaten outside of Carlos Hill creating some magic. But, this is just one that I want to watch to see as far as going towards the rest of the season, especially on the Crew side of things. Will they, kick it up a gear with this signing? Will he mesh with this squad or not? I'm going to call the Crew to win 2-0. Moving on, it's another Eastern matchup. It's DC hosting Miami. This is the East worst team against last season's Shield winners and currently one of the teams in the Leagues Cup semifinals. Miami just beat Tigres at home thanks to 2 penalties from Suarez, with Messi out, of course. Or I think he subbed into that game, but regardless, Miami as hot as ever. It's the business end of the season. And yes, they're coming off a congested schedule and have a semifinal to look forward to. But I'm going to take the value here. I mean, this is one of the best teams in the league. They don't really have the luxury of rotating too much. And even though Jordi Alba is going to be out for this due to an injury picked up in that Leagues Cup quarterfinal, I just think, yes, it is a look-ahead spot. It could be a trap game, so to speak, but there's only so many games left, and Miami is well and truly in this Shield race, despite what the standings look like now. They have, 2 or 3 games in hand, and if they do their business, they can easily be contending for this, as other teams like, the Union, Cincy, whoever, or teams in the West too, have been slipping up here and there. And so I think Miami's just going to continue this fine form. I don't think it's going to be all that pretty. And if DC was full strength here, I might have not considered this as much, but DC is going to have Benteke and Inau. Of course, we all know Benteke, their main source of goal production, and Inau, more of a defensive midfielder. They're both going to be out. They have other players kind of trending questionable, including Kajima, who's another creative piece. So, I'm not really too concerned about Baji, Peglau. DC, of course, is going to get that little bit of a home bump. They're going to want to spoil Miami's party, but I think Miami can still take care of business. I'm not going to get cute or anything with a team total or whatever. But this is good value for, on a road team for Miami. This is a spot to attack, and I think DC is just bad. They're missing their best players, so I don't think they get too much of a true advantage here, even though Miami is on shorter rest. Next up, it's a cross-conference battle between Montreal and Austin. Not one you really see much since Austin has been in the league. Montreal, the season is essentially over. There's no other competitions they're in, not even the Canadian Championship at this point, which was another failure for them. And meanwhile, Austin just hanging around. Not a flashy team by any means, but they have been picking up a bit more positive results lately, and they've had a lot of Texas derbies in the meantime. A couple of draws. One of them was a comeback against the Dynamo, if memory serves me right. And for Montreal, it's a team just really struggling to keep hold of players. They lost Waterman, who I believe was either picked up or is supposed to be signed by the Fire. And then Caden Clark went to another team that's slipping my mind in my notes. Oh, sorry, he went to DC, but he'll be out for that Miami match, which I've failed to mention as well, so it's not like they'll have him anyways. But Montreal is just getting stripped of its players. Vrioni, who is now their DP because through that trade, has been out for more than half the season. Injuries keep reappearing. Owusu, to his credit, plays every single game, no questions asked. That's he's a lock to start no matter what. But they also have Piet out here, and Austin. Their only concern here is Danny Pereira, a big part of that midfield, being suspended for this one. So Austin never makes it easy. They usually get in these lower scoring 1-goal games and have a bunch of 1-1s, as recent games suggest. And I think this is one that can go really any which way. Austin, of course, has the more pressure to take advantage of a situation like this, even though they're on the road. It's a bad team. It's a very damaged team. But Montreal is just playing to spoil other people's chances right now. So that can be dangerous. They can be a little bit more free flowing. But Austin's just not a team I really ever want to trust. If I'm ever attacking an Austin game, it's going to be an under. But this is one where Montreal's defense is just not good either. And I think Owusu can definitely maybe attack this Austin defense on the other end. So this is one I'm staying away from. I think Montreal can pull off the upset in this one, especially considering Pereira's lack of presence in that defensive midfield. Moving on, it's the Union hosting the Fire, and the Union have slipped up a little bit recently. Yes, they advanced to the U.S. Open Cup semifinals now, but in their past 2 MLS games, they've at home given up a lead to Toronto and tied, and then just got lost to the Red Bulls last weekend, a couple days after beating them in the Open Cup. So this is one where they're going to want to bounce back at, and at home they've been, pretty much almost flawless all season. Meanwhile, the Fire, they've been picking up form as well, playing at their other stadium, SeatGeek, in the past couple of home matches. They drew against LAFC. Yes, they choked a couple of leads, but a point against LAFC is never really that bad. And then they won against St. Louis, took care of a business against a really poor St. Louis team, and that attack has been flying. And they just made another signing, the player from Porto. And so we'll see if he can get into the squad soon. But this game, to me, just screams goals. And that the Fire are usually always good for that, right? For the most part, the Union can be a little bit tricky based on the matchup itself. Because at home as well, they can be very solid defensively. But I think they've had some slip-ups, of course, recently. They haven't been as good at getting those clean sheets. And with Andre Blake out in goal, I think this also adds to, the chances that Chicago can really make a game out of this. And so that's why I'm going with the over 3 for the third best bet. I'm not going to get cute and do both score and over. I can see a world where Philly could win this one 3-0 or something along those lines. But of course, I do envision the Fire contributing to this. I think Philly is a little bit weak in midfield as well. Vasilev going to be out again, I think. So you have Bedoya, who's a little bit older legs. And the Fire have just been in amazing goal-scoring form, but that's just the risk they run every single game. It's always back and forth. And when the first or two goals are scored, depending on what the game script is, they're either usually wanting to put you away and exposing themselves on the other end or vice versa. So Philly, the strikers are back in good health. Of course, no other competition or no Leagues Cup to worry about. They weren't even in Leagues Cup to begin with. And the Fire were neither, actually. But yeah, I think goals are on the cards for this one. It's normal rest here again. Both these teams are essentially almost fully fit, and for the Union, it's just Blakeouts. So while the backup has been kind of decent in some games from what I've seen this year, that's just another added bonus. I can see Philly probably getting the result here, bouncing back, because the Fire are just a little bit too sloppy defensively, and Philly can maybe blow past them. But I think this one should push at minimum, and I'm going to call this one something like a 3-1 Union win. Moving on, it's Dallas hosting LAFC, and Dallas has just been abysmal at home this year. I believe it's only 3 wins in 13 games there now, only 5 total if you add the 2 draws. So they've lost 8 games there. That's more than any team in the West, and tied for worst mark in the entire league, tied with the Revs. So LAFC actually hasn't been all that bad on the road. 3 wins, 5 draws, 3 losses. A little bit average, but that's kind of been more. That's been a trend year by year a little bit more. They used to be way worse on the road, and now they're coming off a road win at New England. They're on normal rest here. And Dallas, of course, lost its best player, Lucho Acosta, and also their one of the top goalkeepers in the league, Pais, is going to be injured once again for this one. And Dallas is just a team that doesn't hold a lot of the ball. They're one of the worst teams as far as possession goes, and they're just not really able to, create much on the ball. And LAFC actually, despite previous years, they kind of are able to play in both ways. They love counterattacking with Boanga, as we've known for years now. But this year especially, they've become a really good team in possession. So with Son, of course, in the mix, he's already gotten a start under him, got an assist in the last game. Technically, I think it should be 2 assists since he drew the penalty in that match against the Fire when he subbed on. But regardless, I think this LAFC is just going to take it to this Dallas team. Dallas is lacking talent. It's still potentially in a race for a wild card spot here, but yeah, it's just not a team that has performed at home, and it has not been in great form. I mean, tie against Austin last week, giving up the 3 points since they were leading, and this is, I think, decent value for LAFC on the money line here for the fourth best bet. I think LAFC is gonna start running the table a little bit, climb up. They'll get into a top 4 West position. And try to challenge for that. And they're fully focused now on ending this season strong with Sun implemented. So I'm going to take the road team to handle business in Frisco. Next up, it's Houston hosting the Earthquakes. And both these teams have been pretty inconsistent all season. The Quakes, of course, have been in a bunch of barn burner type of games. Houston, on the other end, they just completely perform against whatever you expect of them, right? We just saw this last time out against the Whitecaps. There's just no other way to really gauge this team for me. Like, they had no business competing in that game against the Whitecaps. The Whitecaps had a second goal called off from Müller, who subbed on, and then Houston got one chance from outside of the box, Artur, I think, and somehow just scored a banger. Like that's just the same thing happened in San Diego. And after that San Diego win, they lost or didn't win for like 3 or 4 or 5. Maybe it might still be going on if memory serves me right. So all that to say, this game being in Houston, the Earthquakes coming off a really, really bad loss to San Diego. They dominated a lot of that game, got a late goal off a really bad San Diego mistake, and then gave up 2 late goals with their line being so high, especially on that second goal where Dreyer was just able to get one of those, what's already becoming kind of like his trademark, scoring on a just very, very late in games on a type of counter, and just rolling the ball in. But yeah, all that to say, once again, this one's honestly a toss-up. Houston favored. I don't really know why so like decisively as far as the odds go. But San Jose as well has just a lot of work to do. I think they're going to probably end in a play-in spot, but that also means, they're just going to lack that consistency, but they'll probably just have enough. So nothing about this game really excites me. And I just don't know what to get from Houston's perspective. So I'm going to call this one a draw. Here it's Nashville hosting Orlando, and both tied on points. Nashville just above Orlando on the tiebreaker. And Nashville has slipped up recently, and that compiled last week after they gave up a lead at NYC and lost. And Orlando, on the other end, has been absolutely flying. All credit to them. They kind of blew through Leagues Cup after the first group stage game, and now put in a very, very, they just dug in to beat Toluca in the quarterfinal. It was 0-0. They were heavily defensive, and they survived on penalties, and now they're going to have another match with Miami, a team that they have a 7-1, I believe, goal differential against this season, with 2 wins, of course, against Miami. And so it's a big semifinal coming up this coming midweek after this slate. And, they're traveling here. They have to come back to Miami, and they're not a team that really has the depth to rotate all that much as far as the attack goes. But in midfield, I think, you might see a little bit of rotation, maybe on the back line. And I just think, despite the fact that, of course, this is a very important game for positioning in the conference, right? You want to be top 4 for the home field advantage. I think this is a good spot to fade Orlando in. Nashville getting back at home here. We know what their style is. Orlando, of course, has been scoring plenty of goals, but once again, I think they're just going to be a little bit weaker here as far as the lineup goes, and it's very difficult to go into Nashville this season and get points. So I think Nashville bounces back. Zimmerman played about 15-20 minutes off the bench last game. I think he could be good to go for this one, and when he's in, of course, I definitely feel a little bit more, or not a little bit, much more assured about Nashville's, defense for sure. Even though Lovitz might be still injured, one of the fullbacks, the rest of the squad is primarily healthy. And once again, I just like this as a bounce back spot for Nashville. They've slipped up a little bit as far as holding on to one of these top 4 positions, and this is the time to kind of start, just widening that gap a little bit and solidifying themselves. So I'm going to take them against a Orlando side that is looking ahead, going to be a little bit more rotated. And yeah, that's who I'm favoring here. Next up, we go over to the West, and it's RSL hosting Minnesota. And RSL has been, of course, one of the better teams throughout this second half of the season. Meanwhile, Minnesota has just been doing their thing all season and sticking to their beliefs as far as their play style, the counterattack. But going into RSL is never easy, and winning. But last season's playoffs, we saw Minnesota do just that, hang on for a draw in the first round that they eventually won on penalties. and they swept that series 2-0. But those are two games that are very, very tight. With full strength. Obviously, both teams kind of have bolstered up a little bit since last playoffs. But RSL here are going to be missing Luna, of course, their best player, and also Agata. Even though they've gotten Olatunji and Cruz implemented a little bit with some playing time as in kind of a dual striker kind of thing. Of course they're going to be weak without their main chance creator, and they're coming off that loss on the road to Charlotte. Meanwhile, Minnesota is in pretty good form. They just beat a Sounders team that, of course, has been flying and is also in the Leagues Cup semifinals, and is pretty healthy. But the big thing here is that Oluwaseyi is potentially going to go to Villarreal in La Liga, and so we'll have to see how serious those talks are, if he's going to be held out for this one, because while I'm still confident in Minnesota to do fine without him in this game specifically, he definitely adds another layer of danger, and I think the odds for Minnesota draw no bet at the moment are pretty tasty, and so I would love to wait to see if he's playing or not, or if he's going to be held out. He might get one final game with the Loons before heading over. So we'll have to see. But I think this is another good spot to attack RSL. That's the only kind of thing I would take, because going into this altitude, and it just gets tricky for teams. No matter how good you think you are, it might just be one of those trap games. So I'm going to go with Minnesota to at least draw, and I think they can steal a win, especially if Oluwaseyi is playing. Next up, it's the Whitecaps hosting St. Louis. And the Whitecaps last time out failed to hold on to a win that was all but sure, and failed to score that second goal against the Dynamo before giving up a very late goal from outside the box, with Müller getting his debut goal chalked off due to offside. And St. Louis, after beating Nashville a couple of games ago, lost to the Fire on the road. Put up a decent performance, getting on the score sheet, but that defense has kind of been a bit of their undoing all season. And, of course, Tykert has been out for a couple of games now and still kind of trending out for this one. So Jean De Silva as well, after being traded from Atlanta this season, already on the move. He went to Maccabi Tel Aviv, I believe. So that's another depth piece gone. And, the season's all but over for St. Louis. Really just, once again, they've been a bit of an overs team, especially on the turn of the season, the second half. That was kind of the same situation last year when they did first sign all the Germans, all the main pieces they have right now. But yeah, I think this is one Vancouver should be favored in, but they've also been really sketchy when it comes to holding clean sheets, and that is what kind of takes me away from this game. I just think they've had a couple of hits on that back line. Of course, Veselinovic out for the season. Adekugbe, it seems like he's been working his way back, but of course still not ready. And when is Ryan Gauld going to be back? Because it seems like his timeline has been a bit delayed, and they're just going to be cautious with him. So we'll see if Müller starts this one. I think Vancouver can just slightly edge past this St. Louis team, but the price there is just not for my liking. And they're in a bit of a tight race for positioning. So all the pressure's on everyone. But Müller, of course, is going to add a great piece of creativity to this team. It's just that they get in too many of these types of sequences sometimes where they have the ball and recently have just not been able to actually make the final killer pass. They've been overthinking or just messing up, being sloppy as far as putting in the right type of quality to set up, players like Brian White and others for actual high-quality chances. It's a bunch of not meaningless possession, but it just hasn't been as efficient as it once was to start the season. Of course, they've lost Vite to Pumas And yeah, this lineup has just taken some hits, so it hasn't been as much of a sure thing recently. But I'm still going to take Vancouver to win this one 2-1. Moving on, it's the Galaxy hosting the Rapids. And the Galaxy also advanced to the Leagues Cup semis. They're going to host the Sounders. And we just saw that matchup a couple of match weeks ago where the Sounders rolled through the Galaxy 4-0 in the break between the Leagues Cup group stage or phase 1 and the quarterfinals. So it's going to be a quick rematch. And the Galaxy, of course, the season's over as far as MLS is concerned. It's pretty much hopeless. In a couple of games, they'll probably be mathematically eliminated. And as for the Rapids, still hanging around, but of course lost their best player. Like we mentioned, Mihailovic has gone to Toronto, and just not really a clear outlook as far as the rest of the season goes. Yes, they just beat Atlanta at home, but that's not saying too much. But once again, they're hanging around. They still have Navarro and a couple of decent pieces, but that's a big blow to this team. And they also are still dealing with potentially two of their midfielders or defensive midfielders in Ronan and Atencio out. So for the Galaxy, as we know, they're putting all their eggs in the basket of Leagues Cup because that can get them Champions Cup qualification. And I think it's top 3. So just being in the semifinal, there's going to be a third place game. And so they have 2 chances now to auto qualify for the Champions Cup. And of course they want to win a trophy. So they're 2 games away, and they host this next one coming up midweek. So I would expect pretty considerable rotation for this one. Yoshida's still dealing with a bit of an injury, so he could be rested once again to prepare for the semifinal. And also Nascimento picked up a bit of a knock. So you might see some Ramirez minutes, which has kind of been a little bit lacking recently. Nascimento seems to have gotten a bit of a strangle on that, strangle position or striker position. But yeah, it's just hard to really expect the Galaxy to try too hard in this one. Of course, they have the home advantage, but the Rapids are also beat up. This is just one I'm kind of throwing away as far as my interest in this weekend slate. Close out Saturday's slate. It's San Diego hosting the Timbers, and San Diego, an insane comeback to win at the Earthquakes to keep hold of pole position of the Supporter Shield standings. And it's really all in their hands, right? With about 8 or 9 games to go to, do the incredible in their first season, right? When people had kind of average expectations for them at best. But this roster has assembled together, and despite so many injuries, especially on that back line, they are still picking up impressive results. And that back line is still kind of beat up. McNair was on the bench last game but didn't play, so he might be in line to return soon in some capacity. But right now you're seeing kind of a bit of a mix and match as far as who the fullbacks are. And then it's McVeigh and Dua, who's normally a defensive midfielder, but he's playing as that second center back because of the injury. So with the Timbers, you have Velde and Carballo, who used to be a Red Bulls player, coming in. And Neville said one of them, he didn't specify who, should be available by this game. And that adds, of course, another dynamic to this Timbers team, especially if it's Velde, because he's a pretty proven attacker as far as, some of those leagues just outside the top 5 in Europe. And he's a kind of in his prime at the moment, is a good attacking player, I believe, on the right-hand side. So would love to see what he can do if he's implemented right away. But yeah, this is just one I'm also just interested in. I think San Diego, it's just going to be hard to keep winning games when it's really difficult for them to not concede goals at the moment. And the Timbers, if they can get out to an early lead, can really counter this San Diego team. But it's also going to be hard for them to hold possession, of course. So this might kind of play into the style of both teams, and I'm really interested to see who it's really going to favor, who's going to take advantage, because San Diego should have a lot of the ball and they love it, and the Timbers are probably most threatening when they're direct on counters and catching you out. So as far as the result, I'm not really sure. I think this game could have goals in it, but I'd love to learn more about the lineups as far as the Timbers end of things before I get too invested. We move on to Sunday, where it's a Eastern battle in the lower half of the standings. Two teams outside the playoffs at the moment with minimal hope as far as sneaking into the play-in spots. And it's Atlanta hosting Toronto. And Atlanta is just who they are all season. They haven't turned any type of corner. The attack has been, lacking chemistry all season. They have a couple of players injured on that back line, including Amador. And for Toronto, actually, I've talked about it a little bit, but they've signed Mihailovic. I like their prospects for the rest of the season. Like I said, will they get a play-in spot? I think the gap might be a little bit too big. But I think they're going to be very, very competitive, especially in an East that's kind of up for grabs as far as the inconsistencies. So, especially in the bottom half of the table. So they're going to play a decent amount of teams there. And I wouldn't be surprised if they nab, a decent amount of wins to end this season. And this is another opportunity. Since getting Mihailovic, they've played out to 2 1-1 draws against two top teams in the East, the Union and the Crew, and looked really threatening as well to end that game against the Crew, where either team could have gotten all 3 points. So it's a team that's also really, really healthy, and I just don't understand the line here. This one is giving me, I'm strongly considering this one being an ad as far as potentially a Toronto double chance or something along those lines, plus whatever the spread is, because I just don't, there's only so many games left. Atlanta isn't really particularly commanding games, and I'm just on the up and up with Toronto here. So I think they can definitely keep this close, can definitely even win the game. And Atlanta is just not scaring anyone at the moment, especially as we wind down into the season. The pressure continues to be on them, and they have not shown up. They just lost to a pretty average Rapid side. Yes, it was in that altitude, which is never easy, but they got it handed to them against, honestly, not that great of a team. So I think we shouldn't be surprised if Toronto comes out and even wins this game. Next up, it's Charlotte hosting the Red Bulls. Charlotte in 7th, Red Bulls in 10th. And once again, so many spots up for grabs. Charlotte picked up a win against RSL last time out at home. Another close win. It's just what they do at home. They get low-scoring shutout wins. Even though they haven't been all that, good for clean sheets as a whole this season. At home, of course, they tend to just, especially against the lower teams, just handle their business. They convert on their kind of minimal chances. But the Red Bulls, despite their positioning at the moment, are really no slouch. And they're pretty healthy. Choupo-Moting and Forsberg, they've been getting their contributions, but they're, once again, another team that's really hard to read for me. And the end of this season could go any which way. There's, of course, pressure again on Schwartz because, after the MLS Cup final appearance last season, this team is sitting outside the playoffs at the moment. So points are necessary. NYC sitting only a couple places above them. Chicago just above them. And, every game matters. So I don't really know which way to read this game. I can see goals, but Red Bulls have done the majority of their winning at home. I think they actually still have the best point total at home in the league, the best record. And Charlotte being at home here, despite having no Pep Biel, I think it's one that's just going to be a deadlock. It's going to be something along the lines of a 1-1. I just don't see much separating these two teams because the Red Bulls are not in the upper echelon, but they're not a terrible team. And Charlotte just kind of has trouble with anyone outside of like lower tier bottom teams this season as far as the wins at home. So I think they're not going to find it so easy. The Red Bulls are really, really aggressive in midfield, and they're not just going to let Charlotte pick them apart. So I think the Red Bulls have potential to steal this game, but I'm going to call this one a draw. Closing out the slate, it's Seattle hosting KC on Sunday night. Seattle sitting in 4th. Meanwhile, Kansas City, almost all hope lost here as far as the playoff race is concerned. And Seattle, of course, also advanced to the Leagues Cup semifinal against the Galaxy now, who they'll face on the road after a shootout win against Puebla. They went down to 10 men with about 15 minutes left after Musovski picked up a second yellow for barking at the ref, essentially. And once again, it's a trophy on the line, so I'm going to expect Seattle with this extra rotation to prioritize that, especially considering it's a road game here. And they don't really have the luxury of over-rotating because they have had injuries to Morris, Rusnak, Kent, and so they don't have this depth now to really deal with this run of games. And so even if they rotate a little bit, you're going to see probably a similar lineup, probably putting just a 50% less effort out there. And Kansas City is just a difficult team to get through. Orlando, yes, just did handle them, winning by multiple goals, getting a couple of those ones late. And they have to continue their travels here, but this is also just one that can be difficult for the Sounders to deal with, especially if Garcia comes back. He still seems to be dealing with a bit of a knock, but Tommy is expected back for this one, so that adds another dynamic. But yeah, the Sounders here probably should take care of business, but I'm not really confident about trusting them to steamroll this Kansas City team. They're just not a team that usually, outside of last week, loses by multiple goals. They keep things very, very tight. They're usually lower scoring games. But once again, Kansas City as a whole is just not overly talented. They can't really enforce their will on a game. Seattle's probably going to have a lot of the ball, but you might just see a bit of a slower pace. And Kansas City might be able to just dig in and feel comfortable, and maybe eventually one goes in or not. But I expect a lower scoring game in this one.